President Joe Biden traveled the country this week to highlight his administration's efforts to target clean energy infrastructure and build the economy. He toured a wind turbine generator factory in Milwaukee on Tuesday and focused on manufacturing jobs. According to the White House, this factory, Ingeteam, plans to hire 100 workers using bipartisan infrastructure law money to start producing electric vehicle charging stations domestically. Biden says his policies are leading to a boom in manufacturing and manufacturing investment.
Nearly 800,000 new manufacturing jobs nationwide. More than 20,000 manufacturing jobs in Wisconsin, from Green Bay to Verona to Pleasant Prairie. We've added more jobs in 2 years than any president has in American history in a 4-year term.
Biden's visit to Wisconsin came on the eve of the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Reporter JT Siskowski shed some light on how it's impacted the fight against climate change for one Madison homeowner.
Former WKOW anchor John Beard and his wife had dreamed of putting solar panels on their Madison home for years. They wanted to do right by the environment.
The early days, we were like, wouldn't this be nice? Is it even financially feasible for us? We have 2 kids to put through college, things like that.
But the cost of installing the solar panels was always too high. Then Congress passed and President Joe Biden signed the Bipartisan Inflation Reduction Act into law. Among the over 270 pages of new regulations, programs, and funding allocations was a tax incentive for people to put solar panels like these on their homes. John and his wife could finally afford their solar panels.
The tax credit makes it more palatable to spend the money up front, right? And it's going to decrease the payback time significantly.
And on Wednesday, a crew from Drew Solar arrived to put the panels into place.
When a homeowner puts solar on their roof, they typically offset 90 to 100% of their annual electricity use with their rooftop solar array. So they're really switching from fossil fuels to 100% renewable energy.
Some progressives have touted the Inflation Reduction Act for being the most significant step the U.S. has taken in fighting climate change. A report from Bank of America says that the act has contributed to 270 new clean energy projects, 86,000 jobs, and spurred $132 billion in investments. However, the International Energy Agency has warned that the world cannot develop any more fossil fuel deposits if it is to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And the act included huge new leases for oil and gas projects. But for John and his wife, it's enough just to know that he has helped take one tiny step toward a brighter future.
Joining me now is Tommy Piggott, the Republican National Committee's Communications Director. Tommy, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Of course. So this past week, the president touted his Bidenomics policies, but at the same time, we're seeing new polling, specifically from the AP and NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, showing only 34% of Americans approve of his handling of the economy. The president has an uphill battle here, even within his own base. That same poll shows only 60% of Democrats said they approve. So what would Republicans be doing differently in terms of policy for Americans?
Well, I think the first thing is reining in this inflationary spending, this reckless agenda that prioritizes far left special interest groups over American pocketbooks. Only Joe Biden could go out there and brag about an economic agenda that so many Americans disapprove of. So I think first and foremost, Republicans will stop the inflationary spending. And then second, empower small businesses and empower families because they know best how to spend their own money.
Well, we know that inflation doesn't have everything to do with the president or an administration's policy, very little, in fact. So we have a lot of different factors. We had the war in Ukraine. We have, avian flu. We have the microchip shortage. So what are some things Republicans would do to target inflation on these ends as well? Because, again, the president doesn't have everything to do with rising inflation.
But he has had a lot to do with it. I mean, all you have to look is at liberal economists who say that the $1.9 trillion in spending that he put out there when he first came into office really fueled inflation. And again, that's not Republicans saying that. That's former Obama economists like Larry Summers, Stephen Ratner, Jason Furman, who have all come out and said that his agenda has fueled inflation. So, and then the second part of that, when you talk about the war in Ukraine, for example, the best thing that we can do is ensure American energy independence. And from day one, Joe Biden has attacked American energy independence. We need an all-of-above energy strategy. What Joe Biden has done is attacked American energy. He's basically importing energy from China now, in terms of his green agenda. while at the same time depleting our strategic petroleum reserve to just 18 days worth of supplies. So what Republicans will do is, instead of empowering China and depleting our reserves, we'd unleash American energy, have an all-of-above energy strategy, which would improve national security while lowering prices.
Well, Tommy, in that same realm, the Inflation Reduction Act, which just marked its first year as a law here in the U.S., includes new programs and funding allocations specifically in the fight for climate change. We've reported that a tax incentive for home solar panel installs specifically has helped in the fight for climate change and make it more affordable for Americans, people here in Wisconsin. Can you acknowledge that there have been some benefits to Americans in some of these policies?
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, because most Americans can't even afford a $400 expense. That's the result of Bidenomics. We're talking about Americans that can't afford food, can't afford rent, can't afford gas in their car. That's the reality for most Americans. And according to the Wall Street Journal, the biggest beneficiaries of the Inflation Reduction Act, which we call the Biden inflation scam, have been foreign companies. Over 60% of the projects include foreign companies, which is a direct violation of Biden's promise when he passed this act, and that includes Chinese companies. Democrat congressmen have even admitted that to meet their green energy goals, they will need to rely on Chinese manufacturing of things like solar panels. And they haven't even ruled out using slave labor to produce those solar panels. So there are really fundamental flaws, grievous flaws with this agenda, with Biden's green agenda, and it's leaving behind so many Americans that can't afford basic necessities.
I want to discuss now the first GOP presidential debate that's happening in Milwaukee later this week. Each candidate is required by the RNC to participate. They have to sign the pledge, and part of that says the candidate will support the eventual GOP nominee. Does former President Trump's reported refusal to play by the rules and sign that loyalty pledge weaken the RNC's position at all?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of what he's going to do. As far as I've seen, he's going back and forth on whether or not he's going to show up to the debate. We hope that he does. It's going to be a huge platform. But I think the biggest takeaway from the debate is really the kickoff of this nomination cycle. It's now time for Republican candidates to go up on that stage and present their vision to the country, a vision for safer communities, for a more prosperous nation, and a nation that, like I said, unleashes all American energy. So that's the vision Republicans are about to put forward. And I think Americans are hungry for that alternative vision that this debate will let Republican candidates put forward.
Tommy, this week, Reince Priebus wrote an opinion piece for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel saying that hosting the convention in Milwaukee next year, quote, proves that not everything in politics is good versus evil, but rather that good things can arise from relationships between Democrats and Republicans. He's, of course, the chair of the host committee for the convention, but thinking in terms of the debate later this week, that convention next year, in such a divided political world today, do you think there is room for both sides of the aisle to work together?
I think there is, and I think there's actually broad consensus across America that wants common sense solutions. And those are exactly the solutions that our Republican candidates are putting forward. We're kicking off this nomination cycle in Milwaukee, and we're ending it with a convention in Milwaukee. That shows the dedication of Republicans to Wisconsin. It shows the dedication of Republicans to really show that we're in these communities, invested in these communities. And I do think that there's a ton of room for broad consensus among the American public. We just need to get common sense back into Washington, D.C.
Tommy Piggott, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me on.